Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 18th of June, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, we're going to get straight on with immigration, Patrick. And I've had quite a few people getting in touch about the Marrakesh Declaration, which was released in early May, actually, but it's only starting to seem to move around the Twitter sphere and various other places. So I just wanted to have a look at that because there's a lot of people making a lot of comments about it and what it is and what it isn't. So let's just have a look at it. This is the latest declaration to come out of the annual Euro-African Ministerial Conference. They may not be just quite annual, but anyway, this part of the Rabat Process, as it's called, which began in 2006, originally set up to contain migration from Africa into Europe, particularly the increase of migrants crossing the Straits of Gibraltar from Morocco into Europe, through Spain, obviously. The conference that took place in May is part of the Euro-African Ministerial Dialogue. That is the Rabat Process. Well, here's the EU's Commissioner for Migration saying, well, migration is a priority for all of us here. And what seems to have happened, Patrick, is that whereas the original intent of the Rabat Process was to, as they call it, contain migration from Africa into Europe, that the focus seems to have changed. So while there is still a focus on illegal migration, the goal of stopping African citizens from coming to Europe seems to have been thrown aside, and it's very much more pro-migration. The only European country which refused to sign up to this, Patrick, was Hungary. Well, they expressed concerns that really if they had signed up to this wasn't something that they're supposed to be there representing their citizens. This isn't something their citizens wanted to see. But the thing that concerned me most was that a lot of the sort of noise on the internet about this seems it's missing the point. I think let's just say that because of course any attempt to encourage migration, because this process particularly focuses on people that have got skills, that have degrees and are engineers and so on, bringing those people into the European Union, into the European community, and but this isn't the largest group of people that are coming in to the country, into the continent. The question is, where are these people coming from? Most of them, vast majority of them. And of course, it is people trafficking. They're being trafficked into Europe. And here's Jeremy Wright saying some months ago, tackling modern slavery is a top priority for this government, the British government, and the UK is leading the fight internationally. And as we reported in February, Alison Saunders, who was then head of the Crown Prosecution Service, saying the United Kingdom is well placed to host this landmark summit of experts and legal practitioners, with the Modern Slavery Act globally recognised as a leading example of legislation designed to tackle this inhuman crime. And this was the event that she was talking about. CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, hosts international summit to improve prosecution of modern slavery. Now, I wasn't sure whether she meant prosecution in the sense of actually bringing it on sort of thing, or whether she was attempting to prosecute people involved in modern slavery. I haven't seen too much evidence of that going on. But let's just look at some of the statistics here, because every year human traffickers make profit of £130 billion from this trade. This is the vast majority of the immigration into Europe, people that don't want to be coming in under these circumstances. 21 million victims worldwide, 54% of them end up in sexual exploitation, 38% of them end up in forced labour, a small percentage other, which includes organ trafficking. So let's just look remember the British government says they're at the forefront of this globally, that they are absolutely leading the charge against this trade, or are we? Well, let's look at the overall profit here, £130 billion per year being made. That's on the left-hand side of this graph. And on the right-hand side of this graph is government funding for prevention. What's the first thing you notice about that?
I think the Government, and this includes the UK government, right?
This is just UK. This is just UK. So
that's impressive, Mike. It's just a big black empty space.
well, just to put a figure on it, it's actually 150 million pounds.
Right.
So 150 million pounds is there to deal with 130 billion pounds of profits. That's not turnover, that's profits. If we look at just the sexual exploitation part of that, we're approaching 900 million pounds in profit made out of that in the UK. UK government funding of 30 million. I think I can't remember exactly what the statistic was. This small amount of funding in the UK and in Europe allows the likes of Europol to produce little news articles like this, saying in this case that they had captured in Greece one of the key men in people smuggling in Europe. One of the most prolific migrant smugglers along the Western Balkan route was arrested in Athens on the 12th of June 2018 after very close cooperation between the Hellenic Police, the Hungarian National Police, Bureau of Investigation, Intelligence Immigration Unit, and Europol. So that's fantastic. A few quid, a few euros thrown in the direction of law enforcement, the vast majority of it staying within the people trafficking area. So just remind everybody, this was the number of referrals of people being referred to the authorities in the UK having been in modern slavery, up 70.7% last year. And if you remember, we've shown these statistics before. The red bars here showing the number of children involved in this. And you see that almost, what's that, about 85, 90% of people involved in sexual slavery are children. These are people that do not want to end. This is not the outcome that they envisaged. They've been trafficked, and this is the biggest business. This is the biggest immigration problem that we have. The Marrakesh Declaration is not a big proportion of this.
Right. So what you're saying is the Marrakesh Declaration is not dealing with this graph here that you've shown us.
It is absolutely not dealing with this graph here,
which is the overwhelming bulk of not only the immigration but the vice within the illegal immigration, organized crime and vice.
That's absolutely right. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at the Marrakesh Declaration and ask what are they doing, because very few people are asking how draining Africa, as I can't remember who put it in this terms, draining Africa of skilled labour such as businessmen and researchers is going to help the continent develop. Now, I have a view about that. You have a view about that. The fact of the matter is that if we look back throughout the history of how Africa has been treated over the last couple of hundred years, historically we have removed raw materials from Africa. We've refused to allow those countries to develop while we've done it. Now we seem to be doing the same with people. You have a view on why we're doing that?
Well, the brain drain with Africa and a lot of the third world, or now called developing world countries, has been going on for quite some time, as long as colonialism, in fact, but more intensely in recent years, especially from the sort of 1950s onwards. The brain drain is a very real thing. So, but what you have to ask, Mike, is the question is, why is it not a priority to help Africa develop and incentivize these countries and help them with funding or whatever, trade funding to keep people in these countries? It seems like the only thing we're exporting to Africa is weapons at the moment and conflict. That's certainly the case throughout the last couple of decades. So it doesn't seem to be a priority, Mike, to make Africa a place that's attractive for young, skilled workers coming out of those countries.
We contrast that with China, who, on the other hand, are attempting to do exactly that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So China is countries who need money. China's there, and as a willing buyer, and you can't blame them for that. But looking at the economic situation around the world, China is the emerging power right now, is the emerging financial power. So with the Belt and Road project now coming online, that you're going to see more and more of this as a trend. We can debate maybe later about how well this is going to benefit Africa, but certainly it's a very different model than the colonial model, which is extraction and exploitation. So Yes, we can debate about how much are the Chinese exploiting poorer countries by coming in and buying up their resources. For instance, are the African countries getting a return, a just return on that? These are all things up for discussion and debate, and they should be. But I think the point is it's a very different model than the colonial model.
Absolutely. But sticking with immigration and moving over to the United States now, a number of mainstream, well, it's become quite a furore in the last couple of weeks. We reported on this, was it last week or the week before, the fact that as Mexicans and in fact people from further south in Mexico are coming up through Mexico and attempting to get into the United States, that families are being split up and children being taken away from parents. This apparently has gone mad now, Patrick, with a whole range of US politicians getting involved. Splits within the Republican Party itself. We've had Laura Bush coming out and saying that the policy is cruel and immoral. Senator Susan Collins expressing concern. Various religious groups, and even Melania Trump apparently was talking about this, much to the chagrin of Kathy Griffin, who really tweeted back in the most foul-mouthed way that she possibly could. Now the point is, according to this article, nearly 2,000 children separated from their families over a 6-week period in April and May after Jeff Sessions, who's the Attorney General, announced a new zero-tolerance policy. And the argument is that US protocol, US law prohibits detaining children with their parents because the children haven't been charged with the crime, but the parents have been. Mm-hmm. That's the excuse for it. And as we reported a week or two ago, of course, these children ending up in camps of a type. But, this wasn't necessarily Trump's policy, was it? Obama was doing the same thing?
Not at all. So you've just pointed out the reason why there is a separation here. This has been going on since the previous presidents, Mike, maybe who knows how long. This is not a Trump invention of separating poor migrant children from their poor migrant parents. And I'm going to point out another thing. The numbers they're talking about, Mike, a few thousand. If you look at that in the whole span of U.S. immigration on the southern border, it's less than a drop in the bucket. But the thing that's not being spoken about is the overwhelming number of unaccompanied minors sent by their families from Guatemala, from Honduras, from El Salvador, sent up through Mexico with coyotes in order to get them into the United States. This has been going on for years and intensely under the Obama presidency, especially during the second term, when America had its migrant crisis in 2013, 14, and 15, which would have got a lot of press in the United States, not so much in Europe, but that was a big problem. So to try to pin this on Trump, I think this is a kind of act of desperation by the resistance and the opposition, the sworn opposition of Donald Trump, and the Democrat resistance, the never-Trumpers, just desperate to pin something on this president, including what is clearly a perfectly good legal reason to separate children. But let's not forget that these are illegal immigrants, Mike. So you do waive some of your rights when you're coming in to the U.S. in this way. It might not be smooth sailing, but to try to use this as a political issue, Mike, it's just this is really desperate.
Pretty desperate. And the other thing that, of course, isn't mentioned in this whole narrative is that that is also a route for trafficking.
This is.
For people trafficking, for drugs trafficking. And another question that doesn't seem to be being addressed in the mainstream press is how many of these children that are being separated from parents, in inverted commas, how many of these are actually their parents?
This is true. So undocumented people are showing up. They don't have passports. They don't have IDs in some cases. So you really have to go. The problem is when you politicize this, then people can work the system. And that's certainly what happened during the previous waves of immigration. So the bottom line is that people in these countries pay very close attention to what's going on politically in the U.S. and will sort of make adjustments, as do the people smugglers, Mike, as do the traffickers. They watch this and they make adjustments accordingly. This is why it's maybe not such a good idea to politicize it to this degree, because this could also distort the picture on the ground and make it actually more problematic and complicated. Who knows? Maybe even incentivize more immigration, because they might see a loophole here, and maybe encourage fraud in terms of, oh, these are my kids, but they're not their kids, kind of thing. You don't know. You don't know.
Okay, let's stick with Trump for the moment. After Kim meeting, Trump turns to Putin. And this is the Sydney Morning Herald from Saturday. And also a report on the day before from the Washington Post. And there seem to be suggesting that there is a huge battle within the Trump administration. People trying to prevent Trump from actually meeting up with Putin from within his own administration. According to this article, this meeting with Putin is provisionally intended to happen in July. Trump's success in advancing the summit planning marks a victory over his aides, who have pushed him to embrace a number of hawkish policies that he later regretted. Trump's insistence on a summit stems from his view that together he and Putin can resolve major geopolitical issues in the Middle East and Europe, said the Sydney Morning Post. Well, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but they're also saying that after a meeting that he had, after a meeting that he had, Trump wants to invite Putin to the White House as well, but his aides have ignored that desire. So, this, again, we seem to get indications of major turbulence within the administration, within the people that he has closest to him.
So everything in the U.S. Policy, in terms of most of its foreign policy, is basically staked on a kind of anti-Russian narrative. So I just think the likelihood of Vladimir Putin coming to the U.S. and meeting Trump at the White House, I don't see that happening. Personally, I'd love to be surprised and be wrong about that, but I don't see that happening in the next 12 months, bar a miracle of some sort.
Would he go there?
Would Trump go to Moscow?
Yes.
That would be the equivalent, as we said on the Sunday Wire yesterday, Mike, that would be like an apocalypse in the U.S. That this would be seen as the ultimate affront to American values. How dare a U.S. president go to Russia and step foot in that country and then meet the president of Russia and be nice to him? Certainly this would be, the CNN would go into meltdown, the New York Times, the Washington Post would the whole mainstream media apparatus would short circuit with all sorts of hysteria, and it would just be like the sky is falling, and there's an asteroid is about to hit the planet or something like this. So it would, in a way, it would be good. If I was Trump, I would say, yeah, let's go ahead and spring the trap, bring it on, short circuit CNN and the media, and put them out of their misery, and put this whole thing to rest. Because the whole point of Russiagate, the whole point of all these stories, is to sort of damage any bilateral relations between Russia and the U.S. or Russia and the West. It's to kick them out of the G8, start a new arms race. This is the whole point of it. So any sort of detente between Washington and Russia would ruin all that. So who would want to ruin that when everybody's making so much money?
What about the FBI and Clinton investigation and Obama's silky lie and the FBI bias? This is Chicago Tribune. Unfortunately, anybody in the UK or in Europe that wants to go and have a look at this article can't do so because of the EU's new data protection regulations. They put up effectively a firewall as such to say that if you're in the EU, tough luck, you can't read it. But tell us about this.
Sure. So this is coming off the back of the Inspector General's report. This is big news in the U.S. because this came out and really chastised the FBI, and particularly James Comey got the short end of the stick in this Inspector General's report about the Clinton. It's mainly to do with the Clinton email investigation, which has seemingly derailed Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016, certainly helped Trump get in the White House. There's no doubt that it did help Donald Trump, but the FBI didn't handle it very well. There was no proven case of, let's say, political bias within the FBI in terms of partisan, Democrat or Republican, but certainly you could make the argument that there is a deep state bias within this agency and other agencies that colluded and have definitely taken a political position, or an anti-Trump position. But what's interesting, if you go back to this slide, is talking about Obama's lie. What is the silky lie? The silky lie was, and we knew this at the time, we reported on the time, Obama lied on national TV when he was interviewed by CBS in 2015. They said, when did you find out about Hillary's home server, her homebrew server? And he said, well, he looked at the camera, looked at the person interviewing him and said, well, I when everybody else did, I read about it on the news. And so that was kind of a ridiculous comment by the president, but it was a lie. The truth of the matter is he knew about it before because he was communicating with Hillary Clinton with a fake email address on her private server. And we reported on that. That's well known, but things are all well known. They've been reported on, but they haven't gotten the spotlight that maybe they deserve. And so what happened here is the FBI, during that whole process, really fudged it. And the reason they fudged it to protect Hillary Clinton and President Obama is because everybody in those agencies assumed that Hillary Clinton would be the next president. They really believed it. And that's why all this fudging and illegal activity and all the sort of, dirty tricks and everything happened. People say, wow, how could it be that bad and so pervasive? Well, they really believed that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president, so this wouldn't mean anything once the elections passed. And Donald Trump would be out of the way, and it'll be 8 years of a Clinton dynasty again. So that's why this happened. The fact that Donald Trump won just basically exposed so much of this corruption. And of course, people aren't happy about this on the other side of the Democratic aisle. But the truth is, this is what happened. So Hillary Clinton ran a home server, and she was mishandling classified information. This is all proven. They just stopped short of throwing her in jail. But if anybody else had done it, Mike, anybody who wasn't a presumptive future president, which Hillary was, they would be in a prison cell right now.
Okay, let's go to Germany. This is a fascinating little story. This is Sputnik's take on it. Berlin on satirical tweet on CDU-CSU alliance collapse. We should keep calm. And this perhaps gives us a bit of insight into just how fragile the German coalition is. Because what seems to have happened is that there was a hoax, a satirical hoax put out on Twitter on the 15th, which is Friday, I think. A Twitter account claiming to be a state broadcaster tweeted that Horst Seehofer, the Interior Minister and leader of the Christian Social Union, quotes, had announced, according to an internal email, the termination of the partnership. And this seems to have gone a little bit viral. And Bild picked it up. I have seen a number of German newspapers publishing in English with stories on this over the weekend. Well, unfortunately, it didn't happen. This was a satirical tweet, as I say. And comments like from the finance minister, for example, calling for calm. The task of governing our country is serious and not an episode of Game of Thrones. And so you've got to ask, Patrick, what state is this country in? What state is this government in? If somebody pulling a gag on Twitter is being taken so seriously that they're having to call for calm in the country?
Well, the thing is, if you go back to that tweet, Mike, there's some truth in the satire. And so clearly there must be something, Mike, to the idea that this is a weak coalition that's been strung together and doesn't really have a mandate, right? This is why it would get public traction. So in any comedy or any joke or any satire, there's always a thread of truth, and that's what makes it so successful. In this case, you could call it a prank. But there's some truth into that. And I think there's a lot of people that are very unhappy with the current leadership in Germany, with Angela Merkel's stance, particularly on immigration.
Well, that's exactly what this was about at the end of the day.
So it's really reflecting some reality out there. So that's probably why it got so much traction. And I would be worried, actually, if I was Angela Merkel, that it did get that much traction. Because if it was ridiculous, it wouldn't have got any traction. So,
okay. Quick reminder, everybody, that AV9 DVDs are available on the UK Column website at a special price until they ship on the 1st of July. You can get those there. You can also get them on the 21st Century Wire website if you are more inclined to do that. And also to remind everybody that Reverend Andrew Ashdown will be speaking in the Rye Bakery in Frome in Somerset on Friday, this coming Friday, begins at 6 p.m. Please get along to that if you possibly can, because Andrew deserves as much support as possible at that, and I'm quite certain that is going to be a hugely interesting talk. Now, the European Union has decided to extend sanctions on Russia over Crimea for a further year, Patrick. So today the Council has extended the restrictive measures in response to the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol by Russia until 23rd of June 2019. The measures apply to EU persons and EU-based companies. They're limited to the territory of Crimea and Sevastopol. The sanctions include prohibitions on imports of products originating in Crimea or Sevastopol into the EU, investments in Crimea and Sevastopol, meaning that no EU-based companies can buy real estate or entities in Crimea, tourism services, and export of certain goods and technologies to Crimean companies for use in Crimea in the transport, telecoms, and energy sectors. So this continues on the basis of what? A lie?
On the basis of illegal annexation of Crimea. Does it mention that there was a referendum anywhere in that?
No.
No. So if it was an illegal annexation of Crimea, there was a referendum. So the coup that happened in February of 2014 in Kiev, the Euromaidan coup, was that an illegal coup because it was unconstitutional? They physically threw out the democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych. So anything that came after that is effectively illegal by the Crimean state. So I think, I don't know, did East Germany have a referendum to join West Germany after the Iron Curtain fell, Mike? Or was that an annexation by West Germany to reunify East Germany together with West Germany? Was that an annexation or a reunification? Because as far as I can see, Crimea used to be part of Russia not so long ago, in 1953. So not much different than East and West Germany in terms of the length of separation. So it was a reunification there, but it's not here. And the reason they had a referendum, I just want to remind people, is because the people in Crimea were looking at what was happening in the Ukraine, where they were basically passing laws against Russian language. Okay, this is a overwhelming majority Russian-speaking community in Crimea. So they're looking at discrimination, lustration, political lustration. They're looking at the basket case that the CIA and Victoria Nuland created in Kiev, and thinking to themselves, well, do we want to be a part of that? And the answer is no. Does Russia have security interests with the Black Sea Fleet based in Sevastopol since Catherine the Great? It's been there for a long time. Do they have legitimate national security interest? Absolutely. Absolutely. Imagine if the United States was in that position with Hawaii, for instance, or one of its other major bases overseas. I think they would move pretty swiftly to secure their assets and probably support the local population if it was in their favor, and certainly it was in this case, Mike. So.
Well, let's stick with the Russian propaganda then, because here's The Guardian. Kaliningrad photos appear to show Russia upgrading nuclear weapons bunker.
So we've seen all the negative Russian press to coincide with the World Cup. It's just endless, the amount of anti-Russian stories. So this is The Guardian basically throwing in the kitchen sink right here. So if you don't have any fear-mongering stories or defamatory Russian stories to run anymore, you go for the ultimate, Mike, which is satellite photos of secret nukes. Okay, so this is the Guardian. Are there secret nukes, Mike?
Well, let's have a look at the satellite photo. There you go.
Oh, look at that. Well, it appears to show, this is the key headline language here by the Guardian, possible nuclear storage bunker. Oh, it's a storage bunker. Okay, so what, for what? Nuclear waste? We're not sure. It appears to be possible. It appears to be possible. So this is the Guardian, who is a great megaphone for Al-Qaeda in Syria, and now they are warmongering for a nuclear standoff between the West and Russia, so wanting to reinvigorate the Cold War. Good job, Guardian. This is top
reporting there.
Is it fake news?
I would have thought so.
It seems like it might be fake news to coincide with the World Cup. Talk about desperation.
Well, let's continue with the desperation. Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear.
Well, there they are. So I don't know if you have the article for this. Yes. So this is on Washington's blog. Do go check out this website. So Fancy Bear exposed the people behind the hacking group. So this is a post here. I think this is an article by might be by George Eliason, who's an independent journalist. And so George is basically asking the question. So Fancy Bear, if you go back to the picture here, so these were the ones accused of hacking and hacking Hillary's emails, basically. And so who flagged this up was a company called CrowdStrike at the time. And CrowdStrike just so happens to be headed by a Ukrainian who his name is Dmitry Alperovich. And he luckily got $100 million from Google in investment recently. That doesn't hurt. But he had to retract a statement that Russia hacked anti-aircraft or missile defense systems, or these hackers did, or something like this, and somehow changed the codes or made it dangerous. But anyway, that turned out to be fake. So they had to retract that. So this is CrowdStrike, who apparently have identified Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear. And this went all the way up to the U.S. Senate. Even Dianne Feinstein's using the names of these hackers. They've been around for a while. Who are they? This is what George Eliason is asking. Who are these hackers? Because they're nameless, faceless hackers who seem to be well positioned for these high-profile hacks. Who are they really? And he is positing that they are, in fact, Ukrainian-linked hackers who are leaving fingerprints in order to demonize Russia, and he makes a pretty convincing argument in this. And of course, George has exposed a number of similar things to do with the Atlantic Council. So some of these Russian hackers supposedly are linked to the Atlantic Council, and the other groups involved in this cluster are Prop or Not and Hamilton's 68 dashboard, which you might be familiar with. So you can see this little cadre formed here, and so there are connections between these and also Bellingcat, the Atlantic Council, NATO-funded Atlantic Council-linked open source investigative group called Bellingcat.
That's the organization that's headed up by Elliot Higgins, whose favorite response on Twitter at the moment seems to be "suck my balls."
Yeah, we saw those tweets by Elliot Higgins. He has been known to go a little bit wild on Twitter when people challenge him. But I do encourage people to look at George Eliason's blog post there, and there'll be more to come as well. So that's on Washington's blog.
Okay, now RT reporting Israeli jets strike 9 targets in Gaza in response to explosive kites and balloons.
There you go. Kites and balloons. This is the big threat for Israel. So they use this to justify. I don't know, are there any explosive kites and balloons, Mike? It's difficult to say. Where does reality begin with the Israeli Public Relations Department? It's very difficult to know. But this is what they say. They use this to justify airstrikes, and no doubt the amount of civilians that have lost their lives at the hands of IDF airstrikes, it's thousands in the recent years. So this is just getting more and more ridiculous on the part of the IDF, so justifying their aggression against the people in occupied Palestine based on what? kites and balloons this week. What will it be next week?
Well, in the meantime, War on Want, the international charity, has really. They were speaking to The Independent. So the headline in The Independent here is UK government is complicit in Israel war crimes against Palestine protesters, say British campaign group. The UK government is deeply complicit in some of the most devastating state violence in our time, is the quote. And the article says over 120 Palestinians have been killed and more than 3,800 injured by the Israeli army since near weekly protests along the Israel-Gaza border began on the 30th of March. Rivka Barnard, senior campaigns officer for War on Want, told The Independent, in abstaining from this vote, the UK has yet again refused to commit to the protection of Palestinians' human rights as they're targeted with the brutal and unlawful use of force by the Israeli military. But make no mistake, the UK is not sitting aside and remaining neutral. While the world calls for violent attacks on Palestinians to end, the UK government continues to approve arms exports to Israel, making it complicit in the violence. That is a pretty definitive condemnation, and one that I haven't really seen from this type of organisation in recent months and years.
Yeah, so it's becoming more untenable, Mike, really ignoring or turning your back to the situation in Palestine. And so you see a lot of these NGOs who, for political reasons, wouldn't want to be too vocal in challenging the U.S. or the UK governments, for instance. They're now feeling the pressure, I think, because I think, Mike, the donor base of a lot of these charities and NGOs, they see this as a significant issue. They want to see something done about it. I don't think they can withstand this pressure forever to sort of bury this huge eyesore, if you will, on sort of 21st century humanity, which is the issue of Palestine.
Now, the issue of disinformation continues to build, and more we're seeing this throughout Twitter, for example. This is just one example. We were talking earlier about this furore over Russia and the World Cup. Well, here's an example of it. Perfect example of it. Dogs killed in Russia before 2018 FIFA World Cup. Enjoy the football. So that was tweeted out on Friday. And 770 retweets when I took this screenshot, Patrick. Except that the photograph isn't from Russia. In fact, as many people have pointed out, the picture is from Pakistan. But hey, 700 plus retweets and counting. Who cares?
Well, this is inspired by a piece of mainstream fake news. Didn't we report on this last week?
Yes. About
the Russian dogs being slaughtered, the call of the Russian dogs, and we need to boycott the World Cup to save the dogs. Well, that piece of mainstream fake news inspired this meme right here, Mike. And as you can see, as with the pro-Israeli fake videos that we also featured and showed on this program weeks ago, it makes an impact. It penetrates the public consciousness. So the fake stories and so forth do that, and then the impression's made. So that's propaganda, effectively. So I thought that was kind of rich that the Sun, I think, running this homeless scam we reported on yesterday on the Sunday Wire, where they're saying, oh, there's all these homeless people in Russia, and they nicked some photographer's photographs from his Instagram account, which is a larger body of work. They cherry-picked a few things that looked a bit, spooky. They featured that in the Sun. They didn't ask for permission for the photos or speak to the photographer. But this is the same Sun, Mike, that ran pictures of homeless people in Windsor, right?
Yeah.
In advance of the royal wedding recently. So hypocrisy, well, that's par for the course with the Murdoch press.
Okay, well, here's Liam Halligan writing in Unheard. This is one of these new alternative platforms that quite a few of the mainstream journalists are writing on. I do wonder whether this is because they can't get serious articles published in their normal newspapers anymore. But anyway, this is the headline is Nomi Prince, the central banking heist has put the world at risk. So he's speaking to Nomi Prince, who's a historian of the banking sector. And he's basically saying when the asset bubble pops, the fragile financial system and the broader economic environment could be thrown into deep depression and turmoil. That's why the QE baton has been passed from the US to other nations and why the central banks are so desperate to collude. Public and private debt combined amount to a staggering 225 of global GDP, much of it accumulated since the financial crisis. The next financial crisis will be sparked by a debt failure somewhere. Then this QE bubble will pop very quickly. Now, this 225% of GDP remark has come from a new website that the International Monetary Fund has put up, which is actually tracking debt globally now. And this is 225% of global GDP, so that's where we're at already. Now, in the UK, as I've shown many times with my UK debt graphic, we're sitting at about 795% GDP.
As a country.
As a country. Now, this is not just public debt. This isn't just government debt. This is all debt. This is household debt, corporate debt, PPI, pensions, obligations, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, Prince says, has a look back at what should have been done after the 2007-2008 crisis. For example, direct support of homeowners, making sure they didn't lose their properties, for example, selective support for banks. And Halligan says in this, what we need, she says, is better regulation, in particular a return to the Glass-Steagall environment where investment banks can't leverage their balance sheets by so much and rely on government support. Well, I couldn't agree more. Halligan, of course, has been promoting the idea of Glass-Steagall style banking separation for quite some time. But, as was a number of people have commented on in recent months, Deutsche Bank is very likely to be the trigger here because it is now effectively an empty shell, except for having significant billions, if not trillions, of debt that it can't really cover. There's nothing left of Deutsche Bank, and it's probably going to be the one.
You think Deutsche Bank's going to trigger a cascade of bank failures?
On the basis that it has such a huge quantity of worthless derivatives paper. And, people comment about the amount of derivatives debt that's sitting out there at the moment, and they say, well, we don't need to worry about it because once all that debt is netted out, the amounts that are left over are pretty manageable. The point here that's being made in this article, and the general point is, of course, that relies on there being an orderly, organised netting out of the values of values in inverted commas of all this paper. The point is, if one of the dominoes falls over, then it's going to take the lot down with it.
Well, you know what that means, Mike? Another bailout and austerity to follow. They've got it all, I'm sure, planned out.
That may well be true, Patrick, but unfortunately there is not enough stuff in the world to cover the obligations.
Well, they do have an answer for that problem, Mike, as you know, and it's more quantitative easing. So
it's more war.
So unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. The EU withdrawal bill, Brexit, the EU withdrawal bill heads back to the Lords today to discuss the amendments that have been made in the Commons. Apparently we can watch everything that goes on from 3 p.m. this afternoon, so that's pretty exciting stuff. So that the amendments that the Commons have made will be considered today, and then it will go back to the Commons, for more consideration later in the week. So that's pretty exciting stuff. But in the meantime, it's all a fraud anyway.
Well, we'll see another referendum. I'm sure this is.
I think this is
the plan.
Absolutely on the cards.
Yeah. As soon as we find out what's in the deal, we want another referendum. And of course, it will go like Ireland. Keep having those referendums until you get the result that Brussels wants.
Well, that's right. But look, we don't need to worry because while all this distraction's going on, whether it be immigration or Brexit or whatever, the transformation agenda continues apace. And the question is, how do we fund all this transformation that's going on in the world? And apparently we're going to use pensions to do that now.
So unfunded liabilities to fund other liabilities.
No, this will be private pensions.
Oh, I see.
So private pensions are generally funded, so we don't worry about that. But this is new regulations published by the government today, where pension trustees will be required to produce a policy which includes an assessment of the sustainability of their investment decisions. So where they invest their money, it has to be sustainable investments. It has to be going to the right places. The policy will need to be available to members of the pension scheme so they can make their own assessment of efforts to combat various risks, including climate change, poor corporate governance, and socially harmful practices.
Oh, I see.
Right? The government is bringing forward reforms to take account of how people put their values at the heart of things they choose to buy and places they live and visit and the jobs they do. They care about the impact for their choices have on our environment and on humankind. And so these proposals, the pension scheme members will be able to see how their money is being put to work and make their views heard.
And those are the most important things that we need to spend money on, those three things?
Absolutely,
Really?
Yes.
I see.
So that's where the investments need to go. That's where the pension money needs to go.
Right.
With more and more young people apparently saving into a workplace pension, 77% of eligible 22 to 29-year-olds working in the private sector are now enrolled in a workplace pension. It's important that their views are reflected in the investment decisions made on their behalf. So Esther McVeigh, who's the Work and Pension Secretary, said the money can now be used to build a more sustainable, fairer and equal society for future generations.
Yeah, interesting.
Isn't that exciting?
It should be, yeah.
But this is big society that this money is going into. And so what we're basically saying is that, pension investments are no longer about making the most amount of money that you can for your pensioners to make sure that they have the biggest pension pot they possibly have. Now we have to invest that money into driving forward the government's policies and making sure that only organisations that are helping drive forward government policies are receiving that funding. So
it's not a pension anymore, it's a tax, right? It's a social tax.
Absolutely.
Right. Interesting.
So, look, we are absolutely out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me today, Patrick.
Okay.
And thank you for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow, 1 p.m. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.